Hey everyone, welcome. Have you ever stood between two different lakes and just wondered, why is one of them this brilliant, crystal clear blue and the other one is, well, kind of murky and green? Today, we're diving deep into the science behind that exact question. We are going to uncover the life story of a lake. So here's our game plan. First, we'll get into how we actually measure a lake's health. Then, we're going to talk about the natural aging process, which has a pretty cool name, eutrophication. After that, we'll take a journey through the main types of lakes, from the really young ones to the old-timers. And to wrap it up, we'll look at some of the really fascinating exceptions to the rule. Okay, let's jump right in. First up, gauging a lake's health. This really gets to the core of why some lakes look so pristine, and, well, why others don't. So let's ask that question again, because it's the big one. What is the real difference between a lake where you can see straight to the bottom and one that looks a bit like pea soup? The scientific answer all comes down to its trophic status. Now that might sound complicated, but it's actually a pretty straightforward idea. Trophic status is just a measure of how rich a lake is in nutrients. And that richness, that's what determines its ability to support an entire ecosystem. You know, the plants, the fish, the wildlife. The more nutrients you have, the more life you have. And that changes absolutely everything. So how do scientists actually figure this out? Well, they look at four key things. First is chlorophyll. That's the green stuff in algae, so it tells us exactly how much algae is floating around. Then you've got total phosphorus and total nitrogen. Basically, think of these as fertilizer for the lake. And finally, there's water clarity. We often measure that with a special tool called a Secchi disk, which tells us how far light can actually penetrate into the water. And that leads us perfectly into our second section, the eutrophication process. The best way to think about this is as the story of how lakes grow old. So eutrophication is just the natural process where lakes slowly become more and more fertile. It all starts when the land surrounding the lake, the watershed, sends a slow, steady trickle of nutrients and sediment into the water. These nutrients are like food, right? So algae and aquatic plants start to thrive. And then, as all those organisms die, they sink and build up as organic gunk at the bottom, which, slowly but surely, makes the entire lake shallower over time. But you really have to keep this in perspective. We're talking about an incredibly slow process here. This isn't something you'd notice in your lifetime. Natural eutrophication unfolds over hundreds, and more often, thousands of years. It's a lake's life story told on a geologic timescale. But there's another path, a much faster one. It's called cultural eutrophication. This is basically aging on fast forward, and it's caused by us, by human activities that dump huge amounts of extra nutrients into the water, from things like farm fertilizers or wastewater. This can trigger these massive, really harmful algal blooms that choke out other life and can wreck water quality in just a few decades. It's like taking a process that should take millennia and cramming it into a lifetime. Okay, so this whole aging process brings us to the main characters in our story. Section 3. Oligotrophic to eutrophic lakes. This is the main spectrum. This chart really lays out the whole journey beautifully. On the left, you've got your oligotrophic lakes. Think of them as young, low on nutrients, super clear and full of oxygen. All the way on the right, you have the eutrophic lakes. Old, nutrient-packed, murky, and often losing oxygen down deep. And smack in the middle, you've got the transitional mesotrophic stage. You can see the pattern, right? As nutrients and productivity go up, the water clarity and oxygen levels go down. Let's start with the baby of the family, the oligotrophic lake. These are your classic deep, cold lakes with very, very low levels of nutrients. And because there's not much food, they have low productivity. That means you'll find small populations of algae, plants, and fish. They're famous for that stunningly clear water and often have rocky or sandy bottoms. And when I say clear, I mean really clear. The average Secchi depth, remember, that's how far down you can see that black and white disk, is around 10 meters. That's about 33 feet. Can you imagine being able to see that far down into the water? It's incredible. All right, next up is the mesotrophic lake. I kind of think of this one as the teenager of the group. It's that perfect middle ground. The productivity is intermediate, so you start to see a little bit of organic sediment building up on the bottom, and maybe a little bit of oxygen loss in the deepest parts of the water. It's a really healthy, balanced system right in between those two extremes. And finally, we get to the eutrophic lake. This is the mature, super fertile stage. It is loaded with plant nutrients, which means it has really high productivity. These lakes are just teeming with life. tons of algae, which in turn supports a huge population of zooplankton and all the small fish that eat them. Of course, all that life makes the water pretty murky. The average Secchi depth here is only about 2.5 meters, or maybe 8 feet. That low clarity is a direct result of all those tiny phytoplankton just suspended in the water column. And nothing illustrates the difference quite like chlorophyll. It's a direct measure of algae, remember? An oligotrophic lake averages around 1.7 milligrams per cubic meter. A eutrophic lake, it's way up over 14. That is more than an 8-fold increase in the amount of algae, and that is what explains the green, murky water. But not every lake follows this exact path from A to B to C. And that brings us to our final section. Dystrophic and special lakes. These are the really fascinating exceptions to the rule. Have you ever seen a lake that looks like it's been stained with tea? Chances are you were looking at a dystrophic lake. But here's the cool thing. That brown color, it isn't from algae. It's actually coming from dissolved organic matter, stuff like humic acids that washes in from the breakdown of leaves and pine needles in the forest all around it. And this gives them this really unique personality. They have that signature tea-colored water and a low acidic pH. But here's the puzzle. Even though they're rich in organic stuff, they're actually low in nutrients and don't support many fish or plankton. It's mostly because those acidic conditions just aren't very friendly to most life. And believe it or not, there are even more specialized types. Acidotrophic lakes are defined by a really low pH. Algalotrophic lakes have a lot of calcium, which can actually make them super productive. Argillotrophic lakes are murky, but it's from suspended clay, not from living things. And siderotrophic lakes, they're just defined by having a lot of iron. So let's do a quick recap of the whole story. First, a lake's trophic status is the key way we measure its nutrient richness. Second, lakes age naturally, over thousands of years through that process called eutrophication. This creates that main spectrum, from the young, clear oligotrophic through the balanced mesotrophic, all the way to the old and fertile eutrophic. And finally, some lakes are just different. They're shaped by unique things from their surroundings, creating special types like dystrophic lakes. So we've followed a lake all the way from its birth to its old age. And this kind of leaves us with one final thought. Now that you know the language, now that you know how to read a lake's life story, what's the story of the lakes near you? Are they young and clear, old and fertile, or are they one of those special exceptions?